My mother stole my identity to open 23 credit cards over 5 years, and when I confronted her, she filed for guardianship claiming I'm mentally incompetent. The court summons arrived on a Thursday afternoon while I was reviewing quarterly projections for my department. I'd been working as a senior financial analyst at Meridian Capital for 3 years, the kind of job that required security clearance and extensive background checks. The kind of job that made the words on the legal document in my hands feel like a sick joke. My mother, Linda Ashford, was petitioning for full guardianship of my person and estate on grounds of mental incompetence. According to the filing, I was unable to manage my own affairs, posed a danger to myself, and required immediate intervention. I read it twice. Then I called her, my hands already shaking before she picked up. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and warm like always. "Honey, I was just thinking about you. Are we still on for Sunday dinner?" I stared at the legal document on my desk, at her signature on the bottom, notarized and official. "Mom, what the hell is this?" There was a pause, just a beat too long. "What's what, sweetheart?" The concern in her voice sounded so genuine it made my stomach turn. "The guardianship petition, the one claiming I'm mentally incompetent." Another pause. "Oh, Daniel, I was hoping to talk to you about this in person. This is exactly why I filed it, honey. You're not thinking clearly. You haven't been for months." My office suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. "I'm not thinking clearly? Mom, I have a master's degree in finance. I manage a team of 8 people. What are you talking about?" She sighed, that patient, long-suffering sound she'd perfected over the years. "Daniel, I know this is hard to hear, but you've been showing signs. The paranoia, the accusations, the erratic behavior. I've been documenting everything. I have witnesses. Your father is very worried." My father had been dead for 6 years. He died of a heart attack when I was 23, left us the house in Riverside with a small life insurance policy that Mom used to pay off the mortgage. I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Dad's dead, Mom. He's been dead since 2018. There was no pause this time. "See? This is what I'm talking about. These episodes. Your father and I have been very concerned about your delusions. We think you might need to be hospitalized for evaluation." I hung up. My hands were shaking so badly I had to set the phone down. I pulled up my credit report on my computer, something I did quarterly as part of my financial planning routine. I'd checked it 3 months ago and everything had been perfect. A 782 credit score, no outstanding debts beyond my car payment, and a small student loan balance I was aggressively paying down. The page loaded. My score was 521. There were 23 credit cards listed under my name, all opened within the last 5 years. The total outstanding balance was $347,000. I clicked through account after account. Capital One Platinum, American Express Gold, Chase Sapphire, cards from retailers I'd never shopped at, store credit from furniture places I'd never visited. The billing addresses were all different, scattered across 3 states, but one address appeared on 7 of them, 428 Maple Grove Lane, my mother's house. I printed everything. 47 pages of credit reports, account statements, collection notices. My office printer hummed and clicked while I sat there trying to breathe normally, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The earliest card had been opened 5 years ago, 2 months after my father died. The most recent was from 6 weeks ago. I pulled up my bank statements next, looking for any sign that I'd known about this, any automatic payments or transfers. Nothing. My checking and savings accounts showed the same disciplined pattern they always had. Direct deposit from Meridian, automatic transfers to savings, my usual spending on groceries, gas, utilities. Whoever had been using these cards hadn't touched my actual accounts. They'd just been quietly destroying my credit in the background while I went to work, paid my bills, and lived my life. I called the first number on the list, a customer service line for Chase Bank. After 20 minutes on hold, I reached a representative named Kevin, who pulled up my account. "Yes, Mr. Ashford, I see you have a Chase Sapphire Reserve card with us, opened in March of 2021. The current balance is $18,450. I explained that I'd never opened the account, that I needed to report fraud. Kevin's voice shifted from cheerful to cautious. "I understand your concerns, sir, but I'm looking at the application here, and it has your social security number, date of birth, mother's maiden name, and previous addresses. The signature on the electronic application also matches our records." I asked what address they had on file. 428 Maple Grove Lane, Riverside, California. That was my mother's house. I'd never lived there. I'd moved straight from college to my apartment in downtown Portland. "That's not my address. I've never lived there." Kevin went through the verification questions anyway, the standard security protocol. Mother's maiden name, Brennan. First car, a 2008 Toyota Camry. The city where you met your spouse. Not applicable. I'd never been married. I answered them all correctly because they were my actual details, my actual life. "Sir, I have to inform you that this call is being recorded, and filing a false fraud claim is a federal crime. Are you certain you didn't open this account?" The way he said it made me feel like a criminal, like I was the one lying. "I'm absolutely certain. I'm a financial analyst. I monitor my credit quarterly. I have no reason to commit fraud against myself." He put me on hold again. Another 15 minutes passed. When he came back, His tone had shifted again, more formal now. Mr. Ashford, I've escalated this to our fraud department. They'll be contacting you within 5 to 7 business days. In the meantime, the account will remain active. I called 4 more banks that night. Each conversation followed the same script: initial concern, verification questions I could answer correctly because they were my real information, skepticism about whether this was actually fraud, promises that someone would investigate. None of them would freeze the accounts immediately. By the time I hung up from the last call, it was past midnight, and I had a migraine building behind my eyes. I'd been living with identity theft for 5 years without knowing it. My mother had been opening credit cards in my name, racking up hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, and I'd been completely oblivious because I'd trusted the quarterly credit reports that came back clean. Except they hadn't been clean. I'd just checked them online through Credit Karma, which had been showing me a perfect score while the actual credit bureaus had been tracking my descent into financial ruin. Friday morning, I called in sick to work and drove to the Riverside Police Department. The officer at the front desk, a young guy with a name tag that read Officer D. Phillips, listened to my story with increasing skepticism. So your mother opened credit cards in your name without your permission, and now she's filing for guardianship? I nodded, sliding the printed credit reports across the counter. 23 cards over 5 years, $347,000 in debt. And yes, the guardianship petition arrived yesterday. He flipped through the pages without really looking at them. Have you talked to your mother about this? I explained the phone call, her claim that my father was still alive, her insistence that I was having delusions. Officer Phillips frowned. Your father passed away? I pulled out my phone and showed him the obituary from 2018, published in the Riverside Press Enterprise. 6 years ago. He took down my information and said a detective would contact me, but his expression suggested he thought I was wasting his time. In the meantime, you should probably talk to a lawyer about the guardianship thing. That's a civil matter, not really something we handle. I left feeling hollow, like I'd just been patted on the head and dismissed. In the parking lot, I called my mother again. This time, she didn't answer. I called 8 more times over the next 2 hours. Each call went straight to voicemail. At 2 p.m., I drove to her house in Riverside. The house where I'd spent weekends and holidays after my parents divorced when I was 15. The house my father had left her in his will. The house where 7 credit card bills were apparently being delivered in my name. She wasn't home, but her car was in the driveway, a silver 2022 Lexus SUV that I knew for a fact she couldn't afford on her salon manager salary. I sat in my car across the street and called the number for her work. The receptionist told me Linda had taken a personal day. I waited. At 4:30 p.m., an Amazon delivery truck pulled up and left a package on the porch. At 5:15 p.m., a mail carrier came by with what looked like a stack of envelopes. I watched through my windshield as they were placed in the mailbox. At 6:20 p.m., my mother's car was still in the driveway, but no one had come in or out of the house. Either she was inside ignoring me, or she'd left in someone else's vehicle. I got out and walked up to the mailbox. The stack included 7 envelopes. 4 were credit card statements: Chase, Capital One, Discover, and American Express, all addressed to Daniel Ashford at 428 Maple Grove Lane. 3 were collection notices from companies I'd never heard of, threatening legal action for non-payment. I took photos of everything with my phone before putting them back exactly as I'd found them. Then I sat on the porch and called my mother again. This time she picked up. Where are you? Her voice was tight, controlled. I'm not discussing this over the phone, Daniel. You need help, and I'm trying to get you that help. I looked at the Lexus in the driveway. I'm sitting on your porch. Your car is here. Where are you? She hung up. 5 minutes later, a Riverside PD cruiser pulled up to the curb. The officer who got out was older than Phillips, maybe mid-50s, with gray hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd seen everything. His name tag read Sergeant R. Kowalski. Daniel Ashford? I stood up from the porch, my stomach dropping. That's me. He walked toward me with his hand resting casually on his belt, not threatening but ready. I got a call about someone trespassing. The homeowner says you've been harassing her. I explained who I was, that Linda was my mother, that I was here because she'd stolen my identity and was now trying to have me declared mentally incompetent. Kowalski's expression didn't change. Do you have any proof you're her son? I showed him my driver's license, then pulled up photos on my phone, family pictures from holidays, old photos of me as a kid with my mom and dad. He looked at them without comment. The homeowner says you've been making false accusations, that you're experiencing some kind of mental health crisis. She's very concerned about you. I felt something crack in my chest. She told you I'm crazy? Kowalski's voice was neutral, professional. She says you've been having delusions, making paranoid accusations, and she's in the process of getting you psychiatric help. She also mentioned that your father is very worried. I pulled out my phone again and showed him the obituary. My father died 6 years ago. She told me on the phone yesterday that he was alive and concerned about me. That's not a delusion. That's her lying to make me look incompetent. Something flickered in Kowalski's eyes, a brief moment of uncertainty. He looked at the obituary, then back at me. She said your father was alive? I nodded. And she's filed for guardianship claiming I can't manage my own affairs, while simultaneously she's been opening credit cards in my name. I have $347,000 in fraudulent debt. I showed him the credit reports on my phone. He scrolled through them slowly, his expression still neutral, but more focused now. These are all in your name? I explained the whole thing. The quarterly checks that had shown nothing wrong, the discovery yesterday when I pulled my actual credit report, the addresses that led back to this house. Kowalski was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I'm going to need you to come down to the station and file a formal report. This is beyond what I can handle with a trespassing call. He walked back to his cruiser and spoke into his radio for several minutes. When he came back, he had a business card. Detective Amy Brennan handles financial crimes. She'll be at the station tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. I'm going to file my report tonight saying this appears to be a civil and potentially criminal matter, not a mental health issue. I drove home in a daze. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed going through every conversation I'd had with my mother over the past 5 years, every holiday dinner, every phone call. She'd been so supportive when I got promoted last year, so proud when I bought my car, so interested in my financial planning. She'd even given me advice about managing my credit score, told me that checking it too often could hurt it, that I should only pull it once or twice a year. I'd trusted her because she was my mother. Because you're supposed to be able to trust your mother. The woman who had raised me, who had comforted me when my father died, who had told me she was proud of the man I'd become. She'd been systematically destroying my financial future while smiling at Sunday dinners. Saturday morning, I drove back to the police station. Detective Amy Brennan was waiting in a small conference room with a digital recorder and a notepad. She was in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun and the kind of sharp, assessing eyes that made me feel like she was cataloging every detail. Mr. Ashford, I've read Officer Phillips' initial report and Sergeant Kowalski's follow-up. I need you to walk me through everything from the beginning. I spent 2 hours telling her the whole story. She interrupted occasionally to ask specific questions, dates, amounts, exact phrases my mother had used. She wanted to see the credit reports, the court summons, the photos I'd taken of the mail. She wrote everything down in shorthand that I couldn't read. When I finished, she sat back and tapped her pen against the notepad. This is complicated, she said finally. Identity theft cases are hard enough when it's a stranger. When it's a family member, they get exponentially more difficult. Your mother had legitimate access to your personal information. She can claim you gave her permission, that you knew about the cards, that you're now having regrets or a mental health crisis. I started to protest, but she held up a hand. I'm not saying I believe that. I'm telling you what her defense will be. And the guardianship petition strengthens her position. She's claiming you're incompetent, which means she can argue that you don't remember giving her permission, that you're confused, that you need help. My hands were clenched in my lap. So what do I do? Brennan looked at me for a long moment. You need to do 3 things immediately. First, hire a lawyer to fight the guardianship petition. Second, file a formal identity theft report with the FTC. Third, dispute every single fraudulent account with the credit bureaus. She slid a form across the table. This is your affidavit of identity theft for our records. Fill it out completely. I'll start my investigation, but I need you to understand. This could take months, years even. Financial crimes are resource intensive, and the DA's office is selective about which cases they prosecute. I filled out the form while she watched. When I handed it back, she reviewed it carefully before signing as the witnessing officer. Mr. Ashford, do you have any history of mental illness? Any diagnoses, medications, hospitalizations? I shook my head. Never. I see a therapist once a month for general stress management, but that's it. No medications, no diagnoses. She made a note. I need that therapist's name and contact information, and I need you to get a full psychiatric evaluation from an independent psychologist as soon as possible. Your mother is going to argue you're incompetent. You need professional documentation that you're not. I left the station with a folder full of paperwork and a growing sense of dread. The guardianship hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks from Monday. I had 21 days to prove I was mentally competent, hire a lawyer, dispute 23 credit cards, and somehow stop my mother from gaining legal control over my life and finances. I spent Saturday afternoon calling lawyers. The first 4 didn't handle guardianship cases. The 5th, a woman named Rebecca Thornton with a firm in downtown Portland, agreed to meet me on Monday morning. Sunday, I was supposed to have dinner at my mother's house. Instead, I filed the FTC identity theft report online and began the process of disputing the accounts. Each credit bureau had its own procedure, its own forms, its own timeline. I spent 8 hours documenting everything, attaching police reports, writing explanations. By midnight, my eyes were burning and my back ached from sitting hunched over my laptop. Monday morning, I met Rebecca Thornton in her office on the 12th floor of a glass building with a view of the Willamette River. She was in her late 50s, with silver hair and glasses that made her look like a particularly intimidating professor. I gave her everything: the credit reports, the court summons, the police reports, the timeline. She read through it all without speaking, making occasional notes on a legal pad. When she finished, she looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Your mother is playing a very dangerous game, she said. The guardianship petition is preemptive. She knows you've discovered the fraud, and she's trying to establish legal grounds to discredit you before you can move against her. I felt sick. Can she actually win? Rebecca's expression was grim. Maybe. Guardianship cases are decided by a judge based on testimony and evidence. She'll bring witnesses who will claim you've been acting erratically. She'll present the identity theft report as evidence of your paranoid delusions. But I have proof, I said, hearing the desperation in my voice. I have the credit reports, the police investigation, Rebecca interrupted, and she'll argue that you're misinterpreting that evidence, that the accounts are legitimate, that you're having a breakdown. The burden of proof in guardianship cases is lower than in criminal cases. She doesn't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you're incompetent. She just has to convince a judge that you're more likely than not to be unable to care for yourself. She leaned forward. We need to move quickly. I'm going to file an emergency motion to dismiss the petition, but I need ammunition. You said you see a therapist? I gave her Dr. Neil Hutchinson's contact information. Rebecca made a note. I'll need a letter from him, and I need you to get a full psychological evaluation this week. I know a forensic psychologist who specializes in guardianship cases. Her name is Dr. Patricia Reeves. Dr. Reeves had an office in a medical building near OHSU. I met with her Tuesday afternoon. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with red hair and a calm, measured way of speaking that immediately put me at ease. The evaluation took 4 hours. She asked hundreds of questions about my childhood, my relationship with my parents, my work, my daily routines, my mental health history. She gave me psychological tests with questions that seemed designed to catch me in lies or inconsistencies. She took notes constantly, occasionally asking me to clarify or expand on something I'd said. At the end, she told me she'd have a written report ready by Friday. Off the record, she said as I was leaving, you don't present as someone with any significant mental health impairment, but I need to complete the formal assessment before I can say that officially. Wednesday, I went back to work. My manager, Kenneth Brooks, called me into his office mid-morning. He was in his early 50s, ex-Navy, the kind of guy who valued discipline and results above everything else. Daniel, I need to know if there's something going on. You called in sick Friday, you've seemed distracted, and I got a strange call yesterday from someone claiming to be your mother. My stomach dropped. What did she say? Kenneth frowned. She said she was concerned about you, that you've been under a lot of stress, and she wanted to know if we'd noticed any changes in your behavior. I told her I couldn't discuss employee matters and hung up. I explained the situation, all of it. The identity theft, the guardianship petition, the police investigation. Kenneth listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as I spoke. She's trying to build a case against you, he said when I finished. She's probably calling your friends, your colleagues, anyone who might testify about your mental state. I felt cold. Can she do that? Kenneth's jaw tightened. She can try. But I'm going to document this conversation in writing, and if she calls again, I'm reporting it as harassment. You're one of my best analysts, Daniel. Your work has been consistently excellent. If anyone asks me about your mental competence, I'll tell them you're one of the most reliable people on my team. He printed out a letter on company letterhead, attesting to my professional competence and work performance. I took it to Rebecca Thornton's office that afternoon. She added it to a growing file of evidence. Dr. Hutchinson's letter confirming I had no mental health diagnoses, Dr. E. Reeves' preliminary assessment, Kenneth's letter, bank statements showing responsible financial management. Thursday afternoon, Detective Brennan called. I've been going through your mother's financial records. It took some work to get the warrants, but I wanted you to know we're making progress. My hands tightened on the phone. What did you find? There was a pause, and I could hear papers shuffling. Your mother's been living well beyond her reported income. The Lexus is leased, but the lease payments are $850 a month. She's made cash deposits totaling over $180,000 in the past 5 years, always in amounts under $10,000 to avoid reporting requirements. She's taken 3 international vacations in the past 2 years, and she's been making minimum payments on the credit cards in your name, which is probably why you didn't notice anything wrong until recently. I closed my eyes. She's been using my credit to fund her lifestyle. Brennan's voice was hard. That's what it looks like, but proving it in court is going to take time. Friday. I got Dr. Reeves's full psychological evaluation. It was 18 pages of clinical language that basically said I was mentally sound, psychologically stable, and showed no signs of any condition that would impair my ability to manage my own affairs. Rebecca filed it with the court, along with her emergency motion to dismiss the guardianship petition. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. I spent the weekend preparing my testimony with Rebecca. She warned me that my mother would likely have witnesses, friends from her salon, maybe neighbors, people who would testify that I'd seemed agitated or paranoid. They might be telling the truth as they see it, Rebecca said. Your mother has probably been laying the groundwork for months, making comments about your mental state, expressing concern. People believe what they're told, especially by someone they trust. Monday morning, I put on my best suit and drove to the courthouse. Rebecca met me outside the courtroom. My mother was already there with her lawyer, a slick-looking guy in his 30s named Craig Morrow. She was wearing a conservative dress and minimal makeup, looking like the concerned, long-suffering parent. When she saw me, her face crumpled into an expression of grief and worry that would have been convincing if I didn't know the truth. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Judge Barbara Kemp. She reviewed the case file with a neutral expression before calling the hearing to order. Craig Morrow spoke first, laying out his case. My mother had been concerned about my behavior for months. I'd been making wild accusations, exhibiting paranoid delusions, claiming my deceased father was alive, filing false police reports. She'd tried to get me help voluntarily, but I'd refused. She was filing for guardianship as a last resort to protect me from myself. He called his first witness, a woman named Jennifer Sullivan who worked with my mother at the salon. She testified that my mother had been very worried about me, that she'd mentioned I'd been making strange accusations and seemed to be having some kind of breakdown. "Linda is a wonderful person," Jennifer said. "She just wants to help her son." Rebecca cross-examined her. "Ms. Sullivan, has Linda Ashford ever told you that Daniel's father is alive?" Jennifer frowned. "Well, she talks about her ex-husband sometimes, but I don't." Rebecca cut her off. "Has she ever told you specifically that Daniel's father is currently alive and concerned about his mental health?" Jennifer shifted uncomfortably. I don't remember her saying that specifically." Rebecca pulled out the death certificate. "Daniel's father died in 2018. His obituary was published in the Riverside Press Enterprise. Were you aware of that?" Jennifer looked confused. No, I thought." Rebecca moved on. The next witness was a neighbor, an older man named Robert Fletcher, who lived 3 houses down from my mother. He testified that he'd seen me sitting in my car outside her house for hours, that I'd seemed agitated and unstable. Rebecca asked him if my mother had ever mentioned that I was her son. "Well, no," he admitted. "She said someone had been watching her house, that she was worried about a stalker." Rebecca entered the police reports from that day into evidence. "Mr. Fletcher, these reports indicate that Officer Kowalski determined this was a civil matter involving family members, not stalking. Did you witness any threatening behavior from Daniel?" Fletcher hesitated. "Not threatening exactly, but, Rebecca continued. "Did you see him attempt to enter the house? Damage any property? Make any threats?" Fletcher shook his head. "No, but he was just sitting there." Rebecca's voice was sharp. "Sitting in a car on a public street, which is not illegal." Craig Morrow called my mother to the stand. She testified about her concerns, her voice breaking with emotion as she described her fear that I would hurt myself, her desperate attempts to get me help. "He's not the son I raised," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Something is very wrong, and I can't stand by and watch him destroy his life." Rebecca's cross-examination was brutal. She started with the phone call where my mother had claimed my father was alive. "Mrs. Ashford, isn't it true that on the phone with your son, you stated that your father and I have been very concerned about his delusions?" My mother hesitated. I don't remember saying that exactly." Rebecca played the recording. I'd recorded the call on my phone, and her voice came through clear and damning. "Your father and I have been very concerned about your delusions. We think you might need to be hospitalized for evaluation." The courtroom went silent. Judge Kemp's expression hardened. Rebecca continued. "Mrs. Ashford, isn't it true that you've opened 23 credit cards in your son's name over the past 5 years?" My mother's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled him. My mother's face had gone pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." Rebecca entered the credit reports into evidence. "These accounts were all opened using Daniel's social security number and personal information. 7 of them list your address, 428 Maple Grove Lane, as the billing address." My mother's voice shook. "That's not possible. Daniel must have a—" Rebecca interrupted. "Must have what? Opened credit cards at your address without your knowledge? Mrs. Ashford, Detective Amy Brennan of the Riverside Police Department is currently investigating you for identity theft and fraud. Would you like to revise your testimony?" My mother's lawyer called for a recess. Judge Kemp denied it. Rebecca pressed on. "Mrs. Ashford, you've made cash deposits totaling over $180,000 in the past 5 years, correct?" My mother didn't answer. Rebecca entered the bank records Detective Brennan had provided. "These deposits were always under $10,000, which conveniently avoids federal reporting requirements. Can you explain where this money came from?" My mother's voice was barely audible. I saved it." Rebecca's voice was cold. "On a salon manager's salary of $48,000 a year? You saved $180,000 while also leasing a $850 per month Lexus and taking 3 international vacations?" "Mrs. Ashford, the math doesn't work," Judge Kemp interrupted. "Mrs. Ashford, I'm going to ask you directly. Did you open credit cards in your son's name without his permission?" My mother looked at her lawyer. He was frantically whispering something, but she just sat there, her face crumbling. Rebecca called me to the stand. I testified about discovering the debt, filing the police report, my conversation with Detective Brennan. I was calm, factual, detailed. Rebecca entered Dr. Reeves's psychological evaluation, Dr. Hutchinson's letter, Kenneth Brooks' employment attestation. She showed the judge my bank statements demonstrating responsible financial management, my work performance reviews, my educational credentials. When Craig Morrow cross-examined me, He tried to rattle me with questions about my mental state, my stress levels, my relationship with my mother. I answered each question directly and without emotion. By the time I stepped down, Judge Kemp's expression had shifted from neutral to something harder, angrier. She reviewed the evidence in silence for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 5 minutes. "Mrs. Ashford," she said finally, "this court finds no evidence that your son is mentally incompetent. In fact, the evidence suggests quite the opposite. Your petition for guardianship is denied." My mother's lawyer started to stand, but Judge Kemp held up a hand. "I'm not finished. Mrs. Ashford, the evidence presented today suggests you may have committed serious crimes against your son. I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal prosecution. In the meantime, I'm issuing a restraining order prohibiting you from contacting your son or accessing any accounts in his name. This hearing is adjourned." My mother stood up, her face pale and shocked. As the bailiff led us out of the courtroom, she tried to approach me. The bailiff stepped between us. "Ma'am, the restraining order is effective immediately." She looked at me with something that might have been desperation or calculation. "Daniel, please. We can fix this." I walked away without responding. In the hallway, Rebecca shook my hand. "That went better than I expected. The judge clearly saw through her manipulation. But you need to prepare yourself. This is far from over. The criminal investigation will take months, and your credit situation is going to be a nightmare to resolve." I spent the next 3 weeks in a bureaucratic hell. Each credit card company had its own fraud department, its own procedures, its own timeline. I filed formal disputes with all 3 credit bureaus. I sent certified letters to 23 different financial institutions. I provided copies of the police report, the court order, the affidavit of identity theft. Some companies closed the accounts immediately. Others insisted on conducting their own investigations, which could take 60 to 90 days. 2 companies sent me to collections before finally acknowledging the fraud. Detective Brennan's investigation expanded. She brought in a forensic accountant named David Cho, who traced the money from the credit cards through my mother's accounts. The pattern was clear and damning. Over 5 years, my mother had opened cards in my name, maxed them out, made minimum payments for a few months, then opened new cards to cover the old balances. She'd used cash advances to fund her lifestyle while staying just under the reporting threshold. She'd been systematic and careful, and if I hadn't accidentally checked my real credit score instead of relying on Credit Karma, I might not have discovered it for years. By the time I confronted her, she'd built a house of cards that was beginning to collapse, and the guardianship petition had been a desperate attempt to discredit me before everything fell apart. 6 months after the hearing, the district attorney filed charges. Linda Ashford was indicted on 37 counts, including identity theft, wire fraud, financial elder abuse, and filing false legal documents. The prosecutor was a sharp woman in her 40s named Michelle Grayson, who specialized in financial crimes. She met with me 3 times to prepare my testimony for trial. "Your mother's lawyer is going to argue that you gave her permission," Michelle warned. "He'll claim you knew about the cards, that you're having regrets now, that you're lying to avoid responsibility for the debt." I showed her 5 years of credit monitoring logs, my quarterly financial reviews, email exchanges with my mother, where she gave me advice about protecting my credit. Michelle nodded grimly. "This is strong, but be prepared for her to claim these are forgeries, or that you're misrepresenting the context." The trial lasted 3 weeks. My mother's defense was exactly what Michelle had predicted. Her lawyer, now a more expensive attorney named Gregory Stone, argued that I'd given her permission to use my information, that I'd been aware of the accounts, that I was now attempting to frame her because we'd had a falling out. He called character witnesses who testified that my mother was a devoted parent, a respected member of her community, someone who would never steal from her own son. But Rebecca's cross-examinations were devastating. She showed that none of these witnesses had any knowledge of my mother's actual financial situation. She presented the forensic accounting that traced every dollar from my credit cards to my mother's accounts. She played recordings of my mother claiming my dead father was alive. And she called me to the stand to testify about discovering the fraud, filing the police report, fighting the guardianship petition. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. They presented bank records, credit card statements, email exchanges, phone records. They called witnesses from the credit card companies who confirmed the billing addresses, the spending patterns, the cash advances. They brought in the forensic accountant who walked the jury through 5 years of fraud in excruciating detail. My mother sat at the defense table looking smaller and older than I remembered, her face carefully composed, but her hands shaking whenever the evidence got particularly damning. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they came back, the forewoman read the verdict, guilty on all counts. My mother's face crumpled. Her lawyer put a hand on her shoulder, but she just sat there, staring straight ahead. Judge Kemp scheduled sentencing for 4 weeks later. In the meantime, I worked with the credit bureaus to remove the fraudulent accounts from my credit report. It was a slow, frustrating process. Even with the criminal conviction, some companies insisted on their own internal investigations. My credit score slowly climbed, 550, 600, 650. The fraud alert I'd placed on my credit meant I had to jump through extra hoops every time I applied for anything, but it also meant no one could open new accounts in my name without verification. I changed my Social Security number, a process I'd initially thought was impossible, but which the Social Security Administration allowed in cases of proven identity theft. My new number felt like a fresh start, a way to close the door on 5 years of fraud. The sentencing hearing was brief. Michelle Grayson requested the maximum sentence, 10 years in federal prison, full restitution of all fraudulent debt, and a permanent prohibition on accessing any credit in my name. Gregory Stone argued for leniency, pointing to my mother's age, her lack of prior criminal record, her expressions of remorse. Judge Kemp listened to both sides without comment. Then she looked at my mother and said, "Mrs. Ashford, you didn't just steal money from your son. You tried to destroy his credibility, his reputation, and his ability to manage his own life. The guardianship petition wasn't just fraud. It was an attempt to permanently silence him. That level of premeditation and manipulation demonstrates a profound disregard for your son's well-being." She sentenced my mother to 8 years in federal prison, ordered full restitution of $347,000 plus legal fees and court costs, and imposed a lifetime restraining order. My mother was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. She didn't look at me. I watched her go and felt nothing. No triumph, no relief, just an empty exhaustion. Outside the courthouse, Michelle Grayson shook my hand. "You should be proud. You fought back and won." I nodded, but I didn't feel proud. I felt like I'd lost something I couldn't name. That night, I sat in my apartment and pulled up the photos on my phone from before my father died. Pictures of family dinners, holiday celebrations, ordinary moments when I'd believed I had a normal family. My mother smiling at the camera, her arm around my shoulders. Had she been planning it even then? Had she looked at me and seen a source of income, a credit score to exploit? Or had something broken in her after my father died, some switch that flipped from parent to predator? I went back to work at Meridian Capital. Kenneth Brooks welcomed me back with a quiet nod and never mentioned it again. My team treated me normally, professionally, and if they'd heard about the trial, they had the grace not to bring it up. My credit score eventually climbed back over 700. The fraudulent accounts were removed one by one from my credit reports, replaced with a statement that said, "Closed due to fraud." I bought a new car, applied for a new credit card in my own name, moved into a bigger apartment downtown with a view of the river. On paper, my life recovered. But there were things that didn't recover. I changed therapists because Dr. Hutchinson kept wanting to talk about my mother, about forgiveness and healing, and I wasn't ready for that. I started seeing Dr. Catherine Monroe instead, someone who understood that sometimes the only healthy response to betrayal is distance. A year after the sentencing, I got a letter from my mother. It had been forwarded through her lawyer because of the restraining order. I held it for 3 days before opening it. Inside was a single page of handwriting I recognized, apologies and explanations that tried to reframe the theft as desperation, as mental illness, as anything except what it was. She wanted me to visit her in prison. She wanted a chance to explain. She wanted forgiveness. I read it once, then fed it through the shredder in my home office. Some doors stay closed, not because you're not strong enough to open them, but because you're smart enough not to. Rebecca Thornton sent me a final bill and a handwritten note. "You did good. Not everyone has the strength to fight back against family. I'm proud of you." I framed the note and hung it in my office at home, a reminder that sometimes the people who help you aren't the ones you're related to. My credit score hit 782 exactly 2 years after I discovered the fraud. The same score I'd thought I had all along, the one my mother had been systematically destroying while I worked and saved and planned for a future she was quietly dismantling. I pulled my credit report on a Friday afternoon and saw it, and I felt something break loose in my chest. Not relief exactly, but something close to it. I'd rebuilt what she'd destroyed. I'd proven I was exactly what she'd claimed I wasn't: competent, capable, and in control of my own life. That Sunday, I drove past the house in Riverside, the one my father had left her. It had a for sale sign in the front yard now, court ordered to pay restitution. I didn't stop. I just drove past and kept going, heading north toward Portland, toward the life I'd built for myself, the one she couldn't touch anymore. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.